Welcome to Complete BS, the official podcast of couch coaches everywhere. Not just football. It's every sport that ruins your parlay, wrecks your fantasy week, and still brings you back for more. Buzzer beaters, blown leads, and brackets in flames. Yeah, we're all over it. Unfiltered takes, armchair analysis, and enough bold opinions to fill a playbook. Hosted by Brian Schmuck, sports junkie, the Saban of stats, and your official voice of, I could coach better than that. Let's go.
Couch Coach Nation, week 11, and that's a wrap. We had 6 teams in the top 25 fall. Indiana and Oregon, they both escaped. Georgia, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, they dominated their opponents. The ACC embarrassed themselves with Virginia and Louisville losing. They're for sure a one-team only in the playoffs conference. The Big 12, they still have an outside shot to get 2 teams in if BYU and Texas Tech play each other in the Big 12 championship game and BYU wins that game. Texas Tech still could get in. Otherwise, they're a one-team conference. Notre Dame, if they win out, they're in, but next week they play at Pitt. That's going to be a really tough game. If they drop that game, that'll free up another spot. USC, Texas, Oklahoma, Michigan, they're all just kind of lurking, waiting for these teams to drop and ready to pounce and get into the playoffs with the bigger conference, bigger name brands ready to go. The idea of expanding to 16 or 24 teams for the playoff is absolutely ludicrous. There aren't even 12 teams worthy of a shot at a national title this year. To think that we should have 16 or 24, it's crazy. It's just a money grab. And speaking of a money grab, YouTube TV and Disney, they still suck and can't reach a deal. AV, what were your thoughts on the weekend?
I think the biggest surprise was Indiana struggling against Penn State. Them pulling it out wasn't a surprise. Oregon struggling a little bit at Iowa. I think we could see that coming. The teams that dominated, we thought would. I thought Texas Tech, that game played out like I said it would last week where they handled business. I think it's just a bad matchup for BYU. I think BYU is still possibly a top 10 team, but I don't think that's a very good matchup for them, just strength versus strength. But overall, I wasn't too surprised by anything. We'll get into a couple of the games. I think Ohio State obviously sitting at number 1 is one of the better well-rounded teams, but I think the well-rounded teams that are starting to separate themselves for me are Texas A&M. They are a really good team, offense, defense, special teams, playmakers, quarterback, lines of scrimmage, all of it. And Texas Tech, I think Texas Tech can play with anybody in the country.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of Texas Tech, they beat BYU 29-7. I personally was a little bit surprised by this game. I thought BYU would be able to do a little bit more with them. At the half, this game was 13-0. BYU had a handful of punts in the first half. They muffed a punt that gave Texas Tech a short field, and then Texas Tech got a field goal on that. Texas Tech had a long drive, 12 plays and 92 yards to get a touchdown there in the first half. BYU couldn't really answer. They got into field goal range. You thought, okay, even though it's a long field goal, they've got a really good kicker. He missed a 52-yard field goal. So at the half, statistically speaking, they were kind of even with each other. Rushing, passing, you look at third down conversions, time of possessions, everything at the half was kind of even, but it was 13-0. You had Texas Tech taking care of business and opportunities when they had them, and BYU didn't. Then you come back into the second half, and it's like, all right, BYU's got to get settled. They got to get something going, and they just couldn't do it. Another BYU pick leads to a field goal, and we're 19-0 heading to the fourth quarter. BYU, they added an touchdown late in the game, but this game was done and sealed. I think that BYU, this is their first conference loss. As I mentioned earlier, they can still get to Arlington for the Big 12 championship game. Probably going to play Texas Tech again versus Tech. They had a loss. They had no margin for error. If they lost this game, they're probably out of it. I think this is setting up another big game in the Big 12 championship game. Playoff berth on the line, but maybe 2 spots if Texas Tech doesn't win the conference championship.
Yeah, the game itself, I think this is where you get in trouble, even though he's a good player with a freshman quarterback like Bear Brockmeyer. Like, this is a big game. He seemed a little bit not himself, but BYU only rushed for 80-something yards. They're a rushing team. They're a physical line of scrimmage type team. So when you do that, and then you can only throw the ball for less than 200, you're going to struggle scoring points. They manufactured 14 first downs, which isn't terrible, but they struggle scoring points, and against a team like Texas Tech that can score points, even holding them to 29 is pretty good. But but that game was over. It was handled shortly after halftime. I do think that you could see a rematch, and I think the rematch would be fairly similar result. Like, you never know. You play the games. It'll be interesting to see how the playoff plays out. I mean, you're looking at one ACC team. How many Big 12 teams could get in? One or two? And I think the Big 10 is top heavy with 3-4 tops. So you're looking at 6 SEC teams. I could see 7 getting in just because you know how it goes. It's starting to become weird.
Absolutely. Well, when you're talking weird, that's usually Iowa football. And Iowa lost 18-16 to Oregon. As expected, this was an ugly game. We knew points were going to be hard to come by. For Oregon, they outrushed Iowa 261-101. They beat Iowa at their own game. They ran the ball. They played really good defense. They got a safety, which was the difference in the game. You got Iowa. They never really found a rhythm. Late in the game, they had a lead up 16-15, but I never felt like Oregon was out of it. They've got the playmakers. They just hadn't made the plays yet in the game, but you knew that they were capable of it. We mentioned turnovers being a key factor in this game, and the first turnover for Iowa stopped an important drive. They were only down 2-0. And the second turnover led directly to a field goal for Oregon. So both of those turnovers proved to be huge in the game. Iowa, they showed they're not ready for prime time. This is their third loss. They're out of the playoff conversation. They're out of Big Ten Conference Championship game conversation. Oregon, they're still in the mix right now. If they're a playoff team, but there's still questions in who have they really beaten. They're kind of a little bit of that paper tiger. And when you play a really good team, what can you do? We know Iowa is a difficult place to play and a really tough defense. I think this is a good win, but it was an ugly win.
Yeah, I think this is a good one for them. Like, when you look at who they've actually beaten, they probably won't get the credit they deserve for this one, but this is a tough game to win. These are the types of games that easily turn into losses. On the road, cold, wet, against a physical team in a big atmosphere. That they were saying that might have been the biggest Iowa home game in like 15 years or something. So they were wanting to win it. They put together a really good effort. So I think this is a really good win for Oregon, but I don't think they'll get credit for it being a really good win. But in my eyes, it was. And it was also one of those games where it was low scoring, but it didn't seem boring to me. There was a lot of tension because it felt like the next touchdown wins, and it was a good defensive struggle. But I give a lot of credit to Oregon for going in there and winning that game, especially giving up the lead late and being able to make enough plays down the stretch to kick the field goal and come back and win it. Tough, hard-fought win for Oregon. Wasn't pretty. I don't think they'll get the credit they deserve for beating a named team, but that was a good win for them, I think.
Absolutely. I think there are a lot of folks, especially outside of the Big Ten, that don't understand or give respect to Iowa football, and it is a tough place to play. Alabama at LSU, and Bama won 20-9. This was a sloppy game. LSU had 2 turnovers. Bama had 1. LSU had 10 penalties. The offenses were pretty vanilla all game. Bama had 2 second-quarter touchdowns. They had a long pass play on each drive, and that was about it for offense in the game. The punters, they were the most used player in the game. Neither team had 60 yards rushing on the ground. It was just very blah, uneventful. I expect that from the LSU offense, but Bama had been clicking on all cylinders. Ty Simpson had really had things going. The ground game was there. I was expecting them to really come out and assert themselves against LSU, and it was just very basic. They didn't look like they cared to play the game. It's honestly, they were disinterested in playing the game. It'll be interesting for me to see, can Alabama turn it on next week against Oklahoma, another supposedly tough defense, or are they disinterested? What's going on there at Alabama? Don't know. Maybe it was a little bit of preparation, lack of execution, but I'll be curious to see if this trend continues into next week.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. You know, I was just talking about the Iowa game being low scoring, but still kind of intense. This was the opposite. This was a boring game, penalties, sloppy. I think I mentioned this last week when we were talking about, when we were previewing this game, that I didn't think that Alabama would come in and blow them out, but they would just kind of take care of business and professionally win. And I think that's what happened. It'll be interesting. You make a good point to see if it's a stale one-off game, or if this is a downtick in their efficiency, because they've been super efficient the entire season, almost to a point where it's hard to keep that up. So that'll be worth monitoring. I think they take care of business against Oklahoma, but it won't be easy. So we'll see. But yeah, it was just kind of a take care of business, get in and get out kind of game for Alabama. For LSU, you named Alex Atkins offensive coordinator. He's the O-line coach. They couldn't rush for 60 yards against a team that, if there is one weakness on Alabama, it's stopping the run, and you just show up and stop the run against LSU, I guess. So kind of a rock fight, but didn't do anything to hurt Alabama in the eyes of the committee or anything else like that. No harm done there.
All right, well, let's give out some game balls. AV, give me a game ball.
I'm going to go on the defensive side this week. I haven't done that yet. I mentioned that when we were talking last week about the Texas Tech game, Jacob Rodriguez saying that he had 7 forced fumbles and 2 interceptions. Well, now he's got 7 forced fumbles and 3 interceptions. He is a turnover creating machine. He had another 9 tackles. I put him close to 100 on the year, 80 something. He doesn't get the shine he deserves, BS. He's a good player on a good defense. Nobody talks about him. Jacob Rodriguez gets my game ball this week.
Absolutely. And I'm right there with you on the defensive side for Texas Tech, but I'm going with Shiel Wood, the Tech defensive coordinator. I feel like he had the perfect plan in place to shut down BYU. They forced 3 turnovers. They held BYU to 3 of 14 on third down. BYU only had 67 yards rushing and under 200 yards passing. He had a masterclass in game planning, and then his team had a masterclass in executing that plan. He's someone that's going to be in the mix for a head job. He'd be a great fit at USF when Alex Golish gets a bigger job this cycle. A couple other game balls to give out. I've got a pair of SEC quarterbacks that had really big days. Trinidad Chambliss, I get it. It was against the Citadel, but the Ole Miss quarterback, he only played 2.5 quarters and was 29 of 33 for 333 yards and 3 touchdowns in 2.5 quarters. And then Diego Pavia, the quarterback for Vanderbilt, led the team to an overtime win against Auburn, 25 of 33, 377 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, added 112 yards rushing and another touchdown. Diego Pavia, Trinidad Chambliss, they both get game balls. I've got questions. Who do you got questions for, AV?
I've got big questions for Manny Diaz at Duke. They go down and lose to UConn. First of all, why are you playing a home and home with UConn? That's not Manny Diaz's decision or fault, but what are we doing here? You beat UConn last year with Malik Murphy at quarterback. You put up 30-something points and held them to 21, but this year with Darian Mensah at quarterback, you put up 30-something points, but they scored 37 points. So you lose to UConn. Last year, Manny Diaz was 9-4, positioning himself well for a coaching carousel run here in the 2025 season. Goes out, pays higher than anybody else would for Darian Mensah. I don't know if you overpay for him, but spent the money, and then you can't stop anybody all year. And the reason I have questions for Manny Diaz is he's a defensive guy. So let's take a look real quick at what their defense has given up this year. You beat Elon, but you give up 17 points to Elon. You give up 45 points to Illinois. You give up 34 points in a loss to Tulane. You give up 33 points in a win to NC State. 21 points against California. 45 points to Clemson. 37 points to UConn. They can't stop anybody. Manny Diaz's defensive coordinator is his background. So what are you doing? Did you give up all of the defense to the defensive coordinator and you're just the CEO? But you go out and you spend money for a good quarterback and you go from 9-4 to 5-4 and can't stop anybody. Make it make sense.
I don't have answers for you there. Manny Diaz, you got to pick it up. You're trying to get a big payday here. A guy who's already gotten a big payday. I've got questions for Curt Cignetti at Indiana, and I get it. Sometimes you can't be on all the time, but Saturday versus Penn State was a missed opportunity to make a statement. You don't have ranked teams on your schedule. You beat Oregon earlier in the year, and that's it. You've got Wisconsin and Purdue left on your schedule before the Big Ten championship game. You needed an opportunity to make a statement. You could have done it at Penn State. Penn State had lost the previous weekend to Ohio State. So everyone's going to be looking at that Indiana Penn State game versus the Ohio State Penn State game. And your game against Penn State doesn't look good when you stack it up against Ohio State and what they did to Penn State. I still think that you're one of the top teams in the country. I still got a lot of love for Indiana. AV and I both, we've been beating the drum for Indiana and Curt Cignetti all year. We're big fans of them. But I don't think yet your team was prepared for this game. I don't know if they're looking past them, if they're just focused on Ohio State at the end of the year and saying it doesn't matter if you win or lose the Big Ten championship game. Indiana and Ohio State, they're both in the playoffs. So are they just mailing in the rest of the season? You can't do that. You got to be ready to go every week. You look at this week, Wisconsin upset Washington. I'm not saying Indiana and Washington are on the same class, but it's possible. Purdue, I doubt it, but if you don't come prepared to play, that is a rivalry game, an in-state Purdue-Indiana game. It matters to Purdue. So Curt Cignetti, I believe in you. I love what you're doing, but I've just got some questions on making sure that your team is prepared every weekend and not just focused on that Big Ten championship game in the playoffs. Well, that's everything we've got. You can follow Complete BS Pod on X and Instagram, and make sure to like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Thanks for listening to Complete BS. Be sure to subscribe, share, and follow us online. And tell us what you think of this episode. Use hashtag CouchCoachNation, and let's keep the conversation going.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.